Apologies for the intrusion in the wake of your loss. Jack stood, declining the offer to sit. He'd not cultivate an illusion of amity with his brother's friends. I'll be brief. Stephen Carruthers, the new Lord Saltwell, slumped in a wing-back chair before a cold hearth. An empty decanter rested upon the floor at his feet. His eyes were distant and devoid of expression as he stared into a cut-glass tumbler, swirling a final half-inch of brandy. Yesterday, Carruthers could barely stand. Today, sitting was a challenge. Tomorrow, a fainting couch. The censure written on his face caused the new Lady Saltwell to leap to her husband's defence. "We all have our own ways of mourning." She stood behind her husband, already garbed in flat black, her hands spread over the gentle swell of her stomach, the reason for her absence from the ball. Despite her words, a deeply ingrained sense of propriety, stock and trade of the torn, drew her lips into a frown at the brightly embroidered blue and red stripes of her husband's smoking jacket. "Won't miss the old bastard," Carruthers muttered. "Nothing I did was ever right." A complaint often lodged by many sons. "Nonetheless," Jack said, "his death will be investigated, a task which I will handle personally." As of this morning, it was agreed. The London vampire would be hunted by the Queen's agents of the Lister Institute. A late-night flurry of insistent messages between Lord Thornton, Mr. Black, and the Duke of Avesbury himself had won Jack the right to take the position of head agent. Not only had a man died in his family's town home, but his background was well suited to such a case. Local authorities had no leads and bodies were piling up. Lord Saltwell's death brought the total to 5. All known victims were male. That was until early this morning. A final skeet pigeon tapping on his apartment window had brought news of the creature's first female victim. At dawn, the body of one Lucy Cooper had been found in a Holywell Street gutter. Another mysterious death, this time involving a woman involved in the pornography trade. Facts that thrilled and inspired reporters as they composed their titillating headlines, intent upon causing the London elite to sputter over their morning tea. Cold calculation or sloppy mistake, the London vampire had broken pattern, a misstep that Jack hoped would ultimately lead to her capture. He needed to conduct this interview quickly and adjourn to the morgue. "You work for the Crown?" Contempt flashed in Carruthers' eyes. "Ought to have guessed. Always prowling about the edges of the room." Jack ignored the dig. "Did your father exhibit any unusual behaviours recently?" "Aside from dying?" Carruthers snorted. "We did our best to avoid each other." He tossed back the last of his brandy, frowned at the empty glass. "Though perhaps you'd find it unusual that he often visited his grandson in the nursery. Easier to avoid me, his heir, to focus on a more distant and promising future for our family." The corner of his mouth kicked up. "Wasn't too happy when he left." "I'm afraid our son is teething," Lady Saltwell explained. "Bouts of crying have unsettled his stomach, the contents of which he emptied onto his grandfather's trousers." "Otherwise my father spent his days at the club, his nights chasing pretty things wearing skirts into shadowed corners. Hardly unusual." Carruthers lifted a finger. "Save the final part where he was bitten." "You mentioned the attacker was a woman?" Lady Saltwell tilted her head. "You're certain?" "Absolutely. I found her bent over him, mouth at his throat. Before I could catch her, she leapt from a window and escaped via the garden." Lady Saltwell frowned. "While wearing a gown?" Pride stuck in his throat. But facts were facts, regardless of the damning implications. "Yes." "Sounds like your investigation is off to a running start," Carruthers snorted. "But you'll pardon me if I question your interpretation of my father's death. Aubrey saw no such figure fleeing the scene and is convinced you chased after some imagined spectre. There must be a more logical explanation. Perhaps my father suffered an apoplexy." Jack's eyebrows rose, involving puncture wounds to the neck